So a very warm welcome to you all to this webinar. It's been great to have the opportunity to present to you all as well. Today we're going to, of course, be studying green criminology, but I was wondering how many of you actually know what criminology is? Anyone on the chat or on the microphone willing to say what they think criminology is?
Let's look out for some suggestions what criminology is, and also, like Laurie says, if you're happy to open up the mic and just give us a suggestion as to what you think it is, then that would be great to hear.
Yeah. Wait a minute, perhaps, or a second. Anyone willing? If not, I'll just...
Let's give it a moment. I'm sure.
Give it a moment. Okay.
Yeah. So we got so Nuro's saying the study of crime.
Fantastic. Yeah, it certainly is the study of crime, but also of crime and deviant behaviour as well. And it's been interesting because some of you have been saying what subjects that you are studying right now, and actually criminology is very interdisciplinary in nature. And what that means is that it isn't just one subject. It draws on lots of different subjects, such as sociology, such as psychology, biology as well, anthropology, and even history. So even if you're not studying criminology or have no knowledge of criminology right now, the subjects that you're doing may well give you a really good basis to studying criminology. So as I say, you don't need to have studied criminology before to be studying it in university. Because it does cover a range of different subjects and includes a lot of different subjects as well. So it is the study of crime and deviant behaviour. But green criminology refers, as it says on the tin, I guess, to some of the green issues revolving around crime. It means thinking about what crime or harm is caused against the environment and how. It also is, it discusses criminals, who commits the crimes against the environment and why, and also the victims, who suffers from environmental damage and how as well. And it's quite interesting, actually, because it seeks to respond to environmental crime by considering how police punish and prevent these crimes. And perhaps a little more theoretically, green criminology is interested in the social, economic and political conditions that lead to environmental crime as well. On my slides.
Just let me just check that you're not muted.
Yeah, sorry, muted. I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that. Okay. How long have I been muted, Rob? Do I need to go back?
No, not at all. Just as you were changing the slides.
Okay, fab. So we are living in a climate emergency. I don't think any of us are under any illusion or any doubt that this is happening. We see it in the news, we see it in the political and social action that's happening around the climate emergency. And green criminology and criminology as a whole is actually seeking to respond to these issues. What is a green crime? There are plenty of green crimes that are no doubt criminal. So we've got illegal corruption, breaking laws relating to cruelty to animals, or protecting wildlife as well. But there are other activities which are legal, but which significantly harm the environment. So things like logging, illegal logging activity in rainforest, and we see recently with the legal logging in the Amazon rainforest, and recent reports evidence that up to 20% of the Amazon rainforest is already gone, and much more is of course severely threatened by the destruction that is happening there. It's estimated that the Amazon alone is vanishing at a rate of 20,000 square miles a year, and if nothing is done to curb this trend, the Amazon could well be gone in 50 years' time. And this is actually legal activity which is happening, but which is of course having a detrimental effect on us as human beings and also on the ecology as well. So if it's not considered a crime, criminologists question if it falls into the broad category of harm. So this concept of harm is really important within green criminology. We're not just referring to crimes against the environment, but we're also focusing on these harms that's happened as well. Green criminology was actually started in the 1990s with scholars such as Piers Byrne, Michael Lynch and Nigel South, among others. So a very sort of new subject area, and criminology was actually pretty slow to respond to the climate crisis, but it's trying to make up for that now. So I've already discussed that green criminology is multidisciplinary and consequently has no distinct theory of its own. It's basically a lot of different perspectives working together, and often the data or information which is collected by green criminologists is qualitative in nature. That is, it's more descriptive and based on things like interviews and focus groups and things like that. So some of you who are studying sociology will be doing some of these research methods you'll be studying them now. So the issue with green criminology, it doesn't offer one unique theory or one unifying theory either. And when we're discussing green criminology, we also have to consider globalization and how globalization has allowed certain types of crime to flourish as well. Crimes against the environment are closely linked to issues of globalization and risk as well. In our modern world, it's been argued that there are a number of risks, and many of these risks, which are human product rather than a product of the natural world, are having a negative impact on our climate. So globalization, what is it? It refers to the increasing interconnectedness of societies, and what happens in one locality is shaped by distant events and vice versa. And I don't need to be telling you that we are living in an age where this is definitely happening, where we can see how actions or something happening one side of the world is having a huge effect on what is happening to us here. So globalization, it allows the spread of new technology, the influence of mass media, also things like cheap air travel. You may not have been on holiday this year, but I'm sure over the last few years you have, and also deregulation of financial markets and so on. And globalization and crime are linked in several ways. There is an increased coordination of crime across national boundaries. And of course, new technologies which are now threatening our well-being. We produce a risk that has the potential to be devastating. Okay, so I hate to sound all doom and gloom. I often find with my green criminology lectures that I leave people feeling a bit distraught, but it is a reality that we're living through, and it's really important that we have a platform to discuss this as well. So globalization, of course, can create more wealth in developing countries, but it doesn't help to close the gap between the richest and the poorest countries either. So it has some positives, but of course the negatives, as we see, are now beginning to outweigh those benefits for sure. So globalization creates new opportunities for crime, new ways of offending, and new crime as well, so things like cybercrime, and often crimes traditional crimes that we see are now also happening online, things like fraud, things like theft. They're now happening on an online platform rather than in a physical way. So it also includes both demand side, wanting the goods, along the supply side as well, providing the goods, for example, the drug trade. So globalization is really creating this new forms of crime and criminal behavior, and green criminology is a part of that as well. So although green criminologists are interested in harms against the environment, there are two distinct green perceptions of harm. We've got anthropocentric and ecological harm as well, and these ideas were explored by White in 2008, and I'll tell you what I mean a bit about that now. But back to this idea of risks and globalization as well, this idea that we have created more opportunities for risk in our society and in the world as a whole, and COVID-19 is of course a part of that risk as well. We have ideas such as traditional and nature societies, such as disease and crop damage, for example. But it's argued that consequences of human action include new sources of risk, namely generated risks. And as our understanding of science increases, so does our uncertainty of life on Earth. And we can We can argue that COVID-19 is also a part of this, so something, a risk that was created by human action could see more opportunities for pandemics in the future as well. So again, not trying to be doom and gloom, but it's definitely something that we should be considering. So this idea with green criminology of harm versus, or environmental harm versus environmental crime. It's not easy to define exactly what green crime is, as many acts that have a devastating impact on our world are not officially considered crime. And as a result, as I said, green criminologists tend to think of this idea of harm rather than crime, and therefore in terms of environmental harm. And Halsey and White, 1998, identified 3 basic concepts to this relationship. And these are anthropocentric harm, ecocentric harm, and biocentric harm as well. Anthropocentric harm considers harm to the environment from the perspective of humanity. So, for example, pollution is a problem because it damages human water supply or causes disease. And an anthropocentric perspective is human-centred, and so it emphasises the biological, mental, and moral superiority of humans over other living things. So anthropocentric is really putting humans central to this idea of harm, and any harm against the environment is mostly harm against humans. And then the ecocentric harm doesn't really differentiate between humans and the rest of the ecosystem. So it regards any damage to any aspect of the environment as damage to the whole system. So sees us all as interconnected, and damage to one means damage to the other. So things such as animal cruelty or habitat destruction are green crimes, even though there are no human cost to it. It refuses, in a way, to replace humanity over or above the rest of nature as well. And biocentric harm, well, views humans as just another species to be attributed to the same moral worth. So organisms such as birds, whales and wolves have the same superiority as we do. But there is this emphasis that green criminology, that is an assertion that the criminal justice system needs to do more than just consider anthropocentric harm, which is what's happening at the moment. And they should also consider how justice systems can help contribute towards the whole and to try and eliminate this idea of harm to the environment. And wildlife trading is a part of this. So you may not know but dealing in wildlife is big business, okay? And it means that any environmental related crime that involves the illegal trade, smuggling, poaching, capture or collection of endangered species and protected wildlife as well. So this includes animals and plants and derivatives or products thereof. So it includes things like live animals and plants, dead animals or unprocessed parts, so bones, tusks, dead plants or parts, for example, dried flowers and roots, and also processed or worked parts, so ivory ornaments, for example. This is also big business. And it has a monetary value of about $25 billion a year, and the East Asian ivory market alone estimated is to be worth $62 million per annum as well. And some suggest it's the 4th largest global illegal trade after drugs, people, so things like people smuggling, and counterfeit products as well. And others say it's second only to the illicit drug trade, and profitable and low risk as well. So it's not seen as something that's important because it doesn't necessarily have an impact on us as human beings. So dealing in wildlife, well, it's not affecting us directly as human beings, but of course it does have a detrimental effect on the wildlife and therefore on ecosystems as a whole. So I think it's silly for us in a way to think that it doesn't have an effect on us, because it does. And where does the UK fit into this global crime? So often the UK is the source, transport, and the final country for those seeking to benefit from this crime as well. Native, wild protected species such as birds of prey, eels, deer, or parts of their body are illegally exported from the UK to meet demand for luxury items in the Middle East. And they're used for things like medicine, so the bile of Bile bear, for example, is used for some alternative cancer treatments. Spinal cord, whale liver, tiger bone, rhino horn and pangolin, all these body parts or animals, so the animals themselves or their body parts are used for alternative medicine or as part of increasing social status as well. And here we are. Okay, so this is a map of the world, and this is where some of these animals come from and what they're used for. So we've got the African elephant used for ivory, souvenirs, jewellery and carvings as well. Beluga and sturgeon used for caviar. Asiatic black bear. The bile is used in Chinese medicine, and paws are eaten as a delicacy as well. So there's something that you probably haven't even considered before. But we are, of course, really endangering these species and threatening our ecosystems as a result of that. Radiated and spider tortoises for consumption, bushmeat and as pets as well. Okay, and of course parrots as exotic pets as well. So there are drivers of demand. This demand comes from a variety of different consumer groups, and often it's influenced by culture as well. Medicinal products, as we've discussed, they have a perceived medicinal value, so as I said, for cancer treatments, and these also drive demands as well. Other things, of course, a collection of arts and crafts, jewellery and antiques, and they're very fashionable, and the price of these items has also increased significantly. Anyone seen The Tiger King recently? We've been watching it over the last lockdown. You will see there how the tiger is seen to increase social status, how they're breeding tigers and how people want pictures of themselves with tigers. And of course, there's a real backlash against this now. If you have watched The Tiger King, if you haven't watched it, you must go and watch it. It's a little bit of easy watching if you need something good to watch. But we can see how the tiger there is represented as it's representative of social status, how people want pictures taken with them in posh hotels in Vegas and things like that. So we can see how this is driving demand. And of course, hunting trophies. I don't know whether you've all seen on social media pictures of people posing with dead animals in Africa where they've been on safari. So again, this driving of demand for illegal wildlife trading and poaching and things like that. And why do they do it? Well, it's often to do with money. Again, yeah, it's to do with money, it's to do with social status. Poaching tends to thrive where corruption is rampant, where they have weak governments, for example, and present poverty as well. We can see in the Amazon rainforest where economy and money is definitely put before the Amazon itself and the indigenous people living in the Amazon rainforest as well, because people are poor. There's a lot of money in illegal logging, or legal logging actually, and we can see how Bolsonaro is really driving that demand as well across the Amazon. So criminal organisations and exporters have huge sums of money to pay keepers, officers and police officers too. We may think it's a sort of crude way of making money, but it's well organised. There's a lot of money behind it, so we shouldn't underestimate how important or how prevalent this is in the world that we live in. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to do an online poll, and I think Rob has already provided you with a code for this. Have you, Rob? If he hasn't, I'm sure he'll just put it in the chat box. So if you have a phone, or if you're in front of your computer, if you could go to www.menti.com, and it'll ask you for a code. And if you put this code in, I think, Rob, have you put it on the chat as well? Fantastic. And what I want you to do is I want you to put in the poll whether you think wildlife crime is an anthropocentric or an ecocentric harm. So I'll ask you for a code, and then I want you to fill in the online poll and tell me whether you think wildlife crime is an anthropocentric or an ecocentric harm. And if I go to that now, if I can go off to, there we go, to the green criminology. There we go. If you're not able to do it, don't worry. There we go, ecocentric, yeah. We will wait and see whether anyone has a different opinion there. Oh, it proves that you've all been listening, doesn't it? Which is good. That's what we like to hear, like to see. Fantastic. Yeah, all of you filling in the ecocentric. Good. Okay, so you have all been listening. Fantastic. Of course, it's an ecocentric. It's an ecocentric harm because it's obviously against wildlife and against animals, but not necessarily against human beings themselves. Although we can't hide that it is having an effect on our ecosystems as a whole, as I've been saying. Okay. Not only do we have anthropocentric, ecocentric and biocentric forms of harm, but we also have something called primary and secondary green crimes as well. So primary green crimes are crimes committed directly against or cause harm to the environment. So this would include your things like corruption, animal cruelty and deforestation. But then we've got secondary green crime, which is further offences arising from exchange rules relating to environment. So this could be things like violence against environmental groups. So, for example, the French attack on the Greenpeace ship, the Rainbow Warrior, and also things like bribery and organised crime to circumvent environmental regulations. So we have the primary, which is crimes or harms against the environment itself, and then secondary, which is against is further offences arising from exchange rules relating to the environment itself. So things like violence against environmental groups. Okay. So keep that in mind. And then I think Rob has also provided you with a video. Rob, shall I try and play the video, or should we just ask everyone to watch it first?
I think, yeah, it'll be best to get everyone to watch it because I don't think you've got the audio driver on there. So yeah, I'm just posting, there's a link to the video, and then I think there's like a Mentimeter afterwards.
There is, yeah, there's a Mentimeter afterwards. So if you could go to menti.com as well, and there's another code for you there as well. And the question is, after you've watched this video, I want you to decide whether the crimes that you see here are primary or secondary green crimes, okay? So either a primary or a secondary green crime. So I'll let you, I think it's about 1 minute, 1 minute 40.
1:45, yeah,
1:45.
so we'll give you 2 minutes and then we'll come back.
Fantastic, okay. Had some answering already, fantastic.
We're just coming up to 2 minutes now.
Fantastic. Okay, so some of you have answered secondary green crime. Fantastic, and you are right. Of course, this was during a protest, a police protest in France, where peaceful protesters were sprayed with pepper spray. They were treated very violently because they were, of course, protesting against environmental damage and environmental harm as well. So it's definitely a secondary green crime because it's not the crime itself, it's a crime committed against those who are trying to stop this type of harm and crime from happening. So well done. It's great to see that you're listening and that it's making sense. It's good. Okay, and then this leads us on quite nicely to Extinction Rebellion.
Dégage! Dégage!
Extinction Rebellion, I think there were some of you on this call who have already been protesting in London or have been on some demonstrations against the climate emergency and against the environmental harm that is happening. If anyone wants to pop in the chat what your experiences of that is, that would be fantastic. I've never actually been on an Extinction Rebellion march, but I have been on some of the climate strikes on a Friday with my children, which has been I've really enjoyed actually, and it's been really important for me to go to these things. But I'm sure you have a lot more to say about this. So if you have any comments or have anything to say, it'd be great if you could pop it in the chat, and Rob can relay it to me then. So Extinction Rebellion, there've been a large number of protests in the UK and around the world by individuals involved in Extinction Rebellion or XR. And what they're doing, they're people who are actively involved in protests, are trying to bring more attention to the issues relating to climate change or the climate emergency. And they're a non-political network whose primary aim is to persuade governments to act urgently on the climate and ecological crisis. And their main tactic is peaceful and non-violent. So what that means is that they're not, they don't perpetrate any violence, but they cause massive disruption. So things like gluing themselves to the tube so that the tube can't go, chucking red paint on the BP offices to look like blood. They have an amazing theatrical way of protesting, which is very dramatic. They get dressed up, and it's amazing to watch actually, and I think they're doing a really, really good job. They're also lots of people from all ages are getting involved with Extinction Rebellion, and there are issues perhaps with class and race where they're only middle or upper class people are joining and are more white, but they are trying to make a difference through their non-violent action. And they have three main aims, which is to tell the truth. The government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological crisis. They say they must act now, so the government must act now to halt the loss of biodiversity and reduce greenhouse gas emissions back to zero by net 2025. And lastly, is to beyond politics as well. Government must create and be guided by a citizen assembly, and they're doing some fantastic work, whether you agree with them or not. The work that they're doing is really fantastic. But the question I have for you is, who are the criminals? And this isn't a Menti poll or anything, but who do you think are the criminals? So some of the protesters' actions are illegal. They do engage in criminal and public order defences, for example. But they would claim that the real criminals are the governments worldwide for failing to act on climate change. And here's where we see with criminology as a whole is that there's no black and white. There's a lot of grey area. So you have some people arguing that one thing is true and another group arguing that the other is right. But in between you have this grey area, and a lot of criminology operas in this grey area, like the Extinction Rebellion group. Who are the criminals? Is it the governments who aren't being honest about the effect on the environment and failing to act? Or is it the protesters themselves who are creating mass disruption really across the city? And any of you have any thoughts on that? Who you think are the main criminals here? Do you think it's Extinction Rebellion? And there is no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, let's look out for some.
Put that out.
Yeah, put that question out there, and if anyone is happy to, because I know Poppy, you took part in various marches, and I know Nuha, you're very focused on this subject. But if either of you wants to just share your thoughts on the microphone, it would be really great to hear those. But if not, then do pop something on the chat to any of you. So Poppy, I don't know whether you're happy to share your thoughts. You would just need to unmute yourself, but otherwise it's okay. You just pop something.
No pressure.
Yeah,
no pressure.
Exactly. So we've just got something. So Poppy is suggesting the government is the criminal, and we may have some alternate views, I guess, sort of coming from the audience as well. So I'm not sure who computer is. It'd be nice to know. Maybe you could just pop in the chat as well. But so they're suggesting that it's the voters. The criminals are the voters. Not enough people vote for tax raising, etc., or difficult choices. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Very interesting, and it's interesting to hear these different opinions. This is what I like most about teaching at university level or teaching criminology. Is, as I say, because there's no right and wrong, you get all these amazing opinions and differing opinions, and I get to learn from you as well. So this is great. Yeah, the voters themselves. So we all have a choice. We all have, especially in the democracy that we live in, we have a choice about who we vote for. And if we don't vote for the right people and we're not willing to pay higher taxes, then I guess so be it. On our head be it. Yeah. Okay.
And then Nuha is saying, I feel like the bigger criminals are the governments because they aren't really taking care of the people in the long run. But legally speaking, the protesters can be criminals too, depending on their form of protest.
So this is very interesting because if you do decide to study criminology, we'll have a whole conversation about what a crime is, because we all think we know what a crime is, but actually the way in which crime is defined is also quite a grey area. So you have legal definitions of crime, but you also have sociological definitions of crime, and that crime is actually socially constructed. It's constructed by the society around us. And as a result, what constituted the crime 50 years ago would now perhaps be deemed legal. So this might be the same for green criminology and green crime as well. So the protesters breaking the law today might not be them breaking the law in about 10 years' time. So that's also really important about who defines crime, who comes up with these definitions of crime. So that's something that you will be exploring if you decide to study criminology. So well done, that's a very good point. Anyone else?
I think that's everything that we've got so far.
Okay, well, we'll move on because we don't have a huge amount of time anyway.
Oh, Laurie, I know you've just said that, but really quickly, Poppy has just said, I took part in marches in my hometown. We got kicked out of the council car park, and I think the higher figures of authority are unwilling to realise the extent of this problem.
Yeah, and I would completely agree with you there, Poppy. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Is that I think there's a frustration, especially among the younger generation, that this is seen to be the biggest crisis affecting us ever. Yeah, it's bigger than Brexit, it's bigger than Trump, it's bigger than, Boris and his response to COVID-19. It's about the fact that there will be no habitable world for us in about 50 years' time or 100 years' time, and the skills that we're teaching our children aren't going to be needed in the time when they grow up. They need to know how to live in a very changed world. And I would agree with you there, Poppy, a real lack of response and a lot of apathy as well. So this is what some of Extinction Rebellion are saying. They have a shared vision for change, creating a world that is fit for generations to come. And they have an amazing sort of manifesto that sets all this out. And you're welcome to refer back to this. If anyone wants a copy of the presentation, I'm happy to give that out as well, so that you can refer back to this. And George Monbiot, he's a Guardian columnist and a political activist and a environmental activist as well. And he says, at the heart of capitalism is a vast and scarcely examined assumption: you are entitled to as great a share of the world's resources as your money can buy. You can purchase as much land, as much atmospheric space, as many minerals, as much meat and fish as you can afford, regardless of who might be deprived. If you can pay for them, you can own entire mountain ranges and fertile plains. You can burn as much fuel as you like, and every pound or dollar secures a certain right over the world's natural wealth. And I think this really goes back to what you said, Poppy, about there's a real lack of apathy about the fact that governments are not responding, they're not responding at all to this disaster. Some of you, if you're studying sociology, might know what white-collar crime is. So it's usually called a white-collar crime because it's those crimes committed by the wealthiest in our society, and they are rarely prosecuted for those crimes. And green-collar crime is a part of that, really. It's crime committed against nature. The term may refer to actual offences in the sense that the act is legal by the law of the country, or a moral offence that may not be unlawful. And it's one of the more, again, neglected research in criminology is the crimes committed by the white-collar criminals, so those in positions of power and authority, and those with the world's wealth as well, so your big oil companies and your big billionaires as well. They are responsible for a huge amount of pollution in our society and across the world. And just quickly, I thought that this might happen, is climate refugees. So as things are, as our world is becoming less and less habitable, if we remember the wildfires in Australia at the beginning of the year, very difficult for us to comprehend the beginning of the year because it feels like 2 years have passed since last January because of the way the world has changed. But the climate emergency within green criminology also makes us think about climate refugees. But there's no single definition of what a climate refugee is. But it's basically environmental migrants are persons or groups of persons who, for compelling reasons of sudden or progressive changes in the environment that adversely affect their lives or living conditions, are obliged to leave their habitual homes. And we saw that with the wildfires in Australia, and we're now seeing it with the Californian wildfires in America as well. And people who choose to do so either temporarily or permanently, and who move either within their country or abroad. And we tend to think that this is something quite detached from ourselves. So, it's hard for us to think about climate refugees in Britain. There's a danger that we consider climate change and even climate refugees as abstract concepts. That is, they're not realities that affect us in Britain or affect us in Wales either. But ironically, residents in Wales are likely to be some of the first climate refugees. So in the far west of Wales, if anyone knows Dolgellau, which is sort of about an hour away from Aberystwyth, it's being called the first place in the UK to be lost to climate change because of rising sea levels and extreme weather as well. So the local council, Gwynedd Council, is saying that they cannot protect this community from the sea any longer. And in 2014, a shoreline management plan was published that estimated it would not be sustainable to maintain flood defences after a 40-year period. So basically, this area is being decommissioned. It's created a lot of uncertainty in the community. People are not able to get mortgages. People aren't able to sell their houses. If they are, that's at a loss. And of course, this is creating huge emotional and welfare concerns for those living in these communities because there isn't enough of enough financial help for them either if this happens. So they're being called Wales's first, or the UK's first climate refugees, and there's been a lot of writing about this in The Guardian and in other newspapers as well. And I'm just checking the time, we've got 5 minutes. So even if governments manage to reverse rising emissions in line with their Paris and the Paris Climate Agreement commitments, sea levels are expected to rise for centuries as global temperatures rise and oceans warm up as well. And we are seeing these effects now. It has started the sort of chain of events, and green criminology is now trying to respond to these challenges as well. And criminology as a whole, as I said, there's no black and white, there's a lot of sort of grey area, and lots of these theories, lots of these perspectives need to be evaluated. So what I'm saying is that green criminology, although it says some really good stuff, although it's come out with some fascinating ideas and perspectives, it does have some issues with it. Begin with, it focuses on social harm rather than law, so it's very difficult to define it. So it can be based on morality, and that can be complicated because we all, of course, have different moralities. We've all got different ideas about how things should be. By simply focusing on harm, the activity might fall under, if we're focusing on harm, then the criminological investigations is almost endless. There's so many harms out there that actually what constitutes a harm could be endless. And whether harm is political and moral rather than empirical, so we can't measure it, it's not something that can be easily measured, it raises a number of other questions as well. So, for example, some green criminologists might decide to include animal cruelty in their definition of harm. So some then would include all meat production or even meat consumption as well. So we can see where some of this grey area is happening. And if we can't agree what constitutes a green crime, then it's not likely that we can agree on what constitutes a harm as well. But it is an important subject, it is an important topic. It's becoming more and more, well, increasingly important for us to discuss this and to start thinking about how we police these sorts of harms and potentially turn them into crimes. And this leads us on quite nicely to the term ecocide. And it's been around since the 1970s, this term ecocide. However, many scholars have argued that the criminalisation of ecocide, that it should be something that that is punishable by law. So describes the attempts to criminalise human activities that cause extensive damage to destruction or loss of ecosystems, and which reduces the health and welfare of species in these ecosystems, including humans. So the harm is not always environmental when we think about ecocide. It can be cultural and emotional, because we're looking at climate refugees. This is cultural and emotional. If we see what's happening in the Amazon, whole communities are being wiped out because of legal logging. And it really can affect communities at a very deep level, especially when we're talking about damage or destruction of ecosystems as a whole. But what those who are advocating ecocide are saying is that there's no international legally binding duty of care towards the earth, and ecocide would go some ways, or take some steps to trying to remedy this. And there we go. That was a massive whistle-stop tour, but I finished with 1 minute to spare, and I'd just like to thank you all very much for coming, and as well let you know that we have an online open day on Wednesday the 25th of November, and you can register for that on our online platform on the Aberystwyth University website. So if you do have an interest in studying criminology with us, or just have any questions for us criminologists or lawyers, then please do register for this event, or you're also welcome to contact me directly. And if I share the slides with you, then my email address is also on that. So thank you very much. I hope that wasn't too quick. Lots to pack in 3/4 of an hour, but I have really enjoyed presenting to you. And if you have any questions, if there's time for questions, you're welcome to ask as well. Don't know whether you do have time for questions.
Well, Laurie, thank you ever so much. You have that, like you say, it's a whistle-stop tour.